your fangirl Tally, and it's time for another Elden Ring lore by Vaati. VaatiVidya has set out a freaking movie, guys, so I hope you're ready. Grab a snack and settle in for the lore of Bayle. Let's do it!
Ages ago, before the Erd Tree, the Elden Lord Placidusax was challenged by Bayle, a dragon that lacked the stone scales that made his kin immortal. So, in mutual hatred, they fought, flesh against stone.
How would that work? Chapter 1.
Welcome to our second video on the dragons of Elden Ring, which refines their stories with the extra content we now have from the Shadow of the Erd Tree. The DLC has revealed many truths regarding the drakes, dragon communion, and so much more. But what I want to start this video off
Dragon
with
communion is still
the
really
Crucible,
weird and gross.
because I think it actually has a lot to do
Dragon.
with the story of Placidusax and Bayle. So what is the Crucible? Well, the aspects of the Crucible describe it as a place where all life was once blended together, and Ordovus's greatsword says that it has a red tint that exemplifies the nature of primordial gold, which is said to be close in nature to life itself. This primordial matter, as it's called in
person
the
has a
Gilded
flower
Greatshield
blooming out of
description,
them.
would eventually go on to become the Erd Tree. But this always confused me. Because if the Crucible existed at the beginning of life on this world, before the Elden Ring, then how could the Crucible have traces of gold? Shouldn't the gold have come from the Elden Ring, which we know arrived later? It didn't make sense to me, but now with the DLC, I think I understand. Count Ymir brings us the revelation that life itself was created in a cosmic rupture of the Greater Will long ago. We know that the Greater Will has gold as its aspect, and so it is that I think gold is just an innate part of the primordial matter of the world, even before the Elden Ring made landfall and put its roots into the Crucible, so to speak. All of this is to say that now I think the ancient dragons were some of the earliest beings born from this primordial soup. They embody many aspects of the Crucible, after all. Horn, tail, breath, wing, fang. So when Meta, Mother of Fingers, arrived on this world to scout things out, I think the ancient dragons might have been the earliest candidates for lordship. Then the Elden Ring was sent down in the form of the Elden Beast upon a golden star, and with that I think these ancients of the Crucible were granted order. Remember, the Elden Beast is the living incarnation of the concept of order. And incidentally, the Elden Beast's internal name is Nebula Dragon, and it does somewhat resemble an ancient dragon. It even spews the same golden breath as Placidusax does. Of course, these things could be just coincidental, but what if they're not? What if the Elden Beast's form was chosen to help ensure that this vassal beast and the concept of order would be accepted by the ancient dragons? That's a fun thought, I think.
It kind of is.
We learn from the remembrance of the Dragon Lord that Placidusax was chosen as Elden Lord. But the question remains, who was his god? Who would be the vessel of the Elden Ring? Was it actually the Elden Beast? Or, more likely, I think, did he have a god equivalent to Marika, who chose him as Elden Lord in the first place? In the end, we just don't know. All we do know is that something went wrong with Placidusax's order, and his god eventually fled, with Placidusax endlessly awaiting their return.
But he looks like the two
Whoever
fingers.
they were,
Do you guys
it's
notice
possible
that?
This god was also an Empyrean, a valid candidate for godhood. And like the other Empyreans that we know of, it's possible that Placidusax's god was also an Empyrean chosen by the Fingers. And that idea makes me wonder if Meta, Mother of Fingers, held any influence in this Dragon Age. The main reference to fingers in this age comes from the Cinder-tier, a 5-fingered dagger wielded by the high-ranking clergyman of Faramazula who served the dragons. The Cinder-tier celebrates a beast's 5 fingers, which are symbolic of the intelligence granted upon their kind. Now, this description doesn't mention who or what granted the beast's intelligence, but in an older version of this description, it does. Back in version 1.0, it was said to be the Greater Will that granted the beast's intelligence. So, this mention of the Greater Will was removed by From Software, and yet it does make sense that the Greater Will would bestow intelligence upon the beasts, considering Placidusax was Elden Lord at the time.
Wow.
So here's my theory on why it was removed. What if From Software removed this mention of the Greater Will because they wanted to keep the lore a little bit more open-ended? What if they wanted to leave room down the line for another character who might have been capable of bestowing intelligence on behalf of the Greater Will? This is just an idea, but what if it was Meta who granted intelligence to the beasts through fingers? But however it happened, the beasts did gain intelligence, and a really great line on that topic comes to us from the description of bestial vitality, which reads, "Having gained intelligence, the beasts must have felt how their wildness slipped away as civilization took hold."
Oh.
The way this last line is worded is strangely sad. I feel like it highlights that while something was being gained here, thanks to the intelligence that was being bestowed upon them, a crucial part of the beast's nature was being lost as well. Order had taken their wildness away. And just like with the aspects of the Crucible, such wildness and chaos would one day be looked back upon with scorn. But as we know from characters like Godfrey, the chains of order can be thrown off and wildness can be embraced. Just so, aspects of the Crucible can persist, even if they are suppressed. For these horns, feathers, fangs, all, according to the DLC, are interminable evolutionary gifts and symbols of primacy, seemingly baked into the DNA of all life born from the Crucible. This is why I think that at certain points in history, the Crucible of Life would randomly throw a curveball into the mix, a wild card that challenges the established order. In the Golden Age of the Erd Tree, it was the Omen and the Misbegotten. And in the Golden Age of the Ancient Dragons, I'd like to propose that this curveball was Bayle the Dread.
Really? Lowborn Kin.
There is something that I think is really interesting about Bayle's heart. The first thing you'll probably notice about Bayle's heart is that it's fleshy and biatrial, as opposed to the hearts of the ancient dragons, which are literally made of stone. This, I think, was a part of a genetic mutation, one that made Bayle weaker in the sense that he was born mortal, without the stone scales of the ancient dragons that twist time and make them undying. But I think it also made him stronger in the sense that he was filled with a mad hunger and a fierceness of spirit that you'd think could only come from one faced with the inevitable prospect of death. The other thing that's interesting about Bayle's heart is that it's dotted with horn-like gravel stones. Gravel stones, as you may know, are the compound stones that make up the stone scales of the ancient dragons. And gravel stone is found within the hearts of all of the drakes. But what makes Bayle's heart different is that the gravel stone in his heart is uniquely horn-like. And considering the significance of horns in the DLC, the fact they spell this out must suggest a connection to the Crucible, right? I feel like there's no way this description is a coincidence. The Beast Horn item from the DLC explains that the Crucible has a particularly strong influence on the beasts of the Realm of Shadow, causing many to grow horns despite the characteristics of their species. It was in this land that the vitality of the Crucible flourished, and so it is that I think Bayle's biatrial heart, dotted with horn-like gravel stones and glistening with deep red liquor, was likely a mutation of the Crucible. Thus, Bayle, father of the Drakes, was born as the first of the ancient dragon's lowborn descendants. These drakes are unique from the ancient dragons. Whereas the ancient dragons have 4 limbs, 4 wings, stone scales, red lightning, and 2 horns, the drakes have 2 hind legs, 2 wings, and a single horn. Most importantly though, they don't have stone scales, making them mortal and paltry compared to their forebears. But if Bayle was the father, then who was the mother?
That's a good
Well, it
question.
can only really be Grail, the great mother of dragons, who might have been born in a similar way to Bayle, or perhaps she's even the product of Bayle mating with a different ancient dragon and continued Bayle's bloodline on her own. It's not completely clear. Whatever the case, as time went on, it seems Bayle's descendants became lesser, not only compared to the ancient dragons, but compared to Bayle himself as well. And I say this because Bayle's later descendants are lacking a few of his key aspects. Take Bayle's magma aspect, for instance. According to the Talisman of Dread, this aspect was so strong that when Bayle roared, it would cause the jagged peaks of molten fury to boil and churn.
Hey!
I love this design choice for Bayle because it's so poetic. Bayle is born of the ancient dragons who were made of rock. And what is magma but molten rock? Bayle's fire is noted to be incredibly fierce, so if Bayle had any stone scales, perhaps they were melted away. I believe this fierce fire is also a defining trait of Bayle's kin as well. You'll note that every furnace golem has a drake inside of its basket, and it's been speculated that these bodies might have played a part in fueling these monstrosities. Speaking of Bayle's fire, even Bayle's red lightning is touched by flame. It's explicitly called flame lightning, and it's unique not only to him, but also to a few of the other drakes on the Jagged Peak.
Wow.
This is significant because red lightning was a hallmark of the ancient dragons, and none of Bayle's later descendants have mastered lightning at all. Specifically, the drakes that can summon flame lightning are the Jagged Peak drakes encountered on your ascent up the mountain.
That is
These
so crazy.
ones exclusively drop an item called Dragon Scale Flesh, which marks them as aged dragons. Bayle too is called an old dragon, so perhaps their older bloodline, being closer to the ancient dragons, explains this unique lightning that they've retained, something that their descendants have lost over time. I want to note also that Dragon Scale Flesh mentions these Jagged Peak drakes have inverted scales, which actually look a lot like gravel stones, so perhaps these drakes really are supposed to be closer to the ancients in bloodline and nature, even if their models aren't any different than the other countless drakes in the game. Another interesting thing about Bayle's Flame Lightning incantation and his other Dragon Communion incantation is that they both require pure arcane to cast, as opposed to something like Placidusax's Ruin, which is cast with pure faith. Placidusax having faith is easy enough to explain. Placidusax was Elden Lord to the Greater Will, and retains his faith even in his place beyond time after being abandoned, so of course his Remembrance incantation also requires faith to channel. As for Bayle's arcane incantations, well, arcane is a little bit trickier to explain as a stat, but basically arcane relates to one's innate qualities. The arcane weapons of Eokide, for example, can be
so deep.
swung
It's
through
like
the air
there's
via
so much
the
to take
wielder's
in, you
will
guys.
alone. And the Albinorics, born of primordial dew, are said to cast sorcery with their innate arcaneness. So when it comes to Bayle, of course he would have incantations that require the highest arcane investment, because he's a character defined by his unwavering will and fury. But why? Why was Bayle so furious? Well, one clue might come from the horn-sent phantom in the Elder's Hovel, who implores Bayle to hurry and lay it all to waste. To lay waste to the proud, the conceited, every last one of that arrogant lot. To be clear, this Elder Horn-sent phantom might be calling on Bayle to lay Marika and her kin to waste specifically, since they purged his kind. But I think there's a parallel being drawn between the Golden Order and the Ancient Dragon Order here. I think this elder considers them all a part of the same arrogant lot. A defining trait of the Greater Will's orders across every age we know of, after all, is a pride among those in power and their dismissal of those seen as lesser. In the Age of the Erd Tree, the lesser were those touched by the Crucible, the Tarnished, and many more besides. And in the Age of the Ancient Dragons, the lessers were the beasts, who the Dragon Priestess actually insults as foul and lowly in the DLC. And then eventually the Drakes too were considered foul and lowly, and the Ancients would go on to have intense hatred for them as they considered them their Lowborn Kin. So yeah, I think there's a parallel between the Ancient Dragon's Order and Marika's, and I think this is why the Elder Hornsent Phantom is calling on Bayle to lay waste to all of it. Now, the Ancient Dragons might be excessively prideful in all of their depictions, but I do want to note that Bayle was likely once on their side, because as we've discussed with Marika, being called a traitor suggests that there was a kinship originally at some point. So Bayle might have had a kinship with the Ancient Dragons as well. It might not have been a great kinship, but he must have been considered a part of their order, at least. But then the Ancient Dragons would label him a tyrant, and it all suggests that Bayle went against the established order and an established peace, harbinging destruction upon it all as retribution for their conceit and their discrimination, perhaps. I think, just like with Seath the Scaleless from Dark Souls, Bayle sought revenge upon his prideful, immortal kin. There's a huge parallel between these two characters. But unlike Seath, who switched sides to find his advantage, Bayle took a way more direct approach and challenged the Dragon Lord himself.
Wow. God.
According to the Talisman of the Dread, Bayle's challenge to the ancient Dragon Lord ended in grievous mutual injury, which has forced his weight to now be supported by his tail, and he lost a talon, which now terminates in a sharp bone that's wreathed in lightning. And as for Placidusax's wounds, his body is covered in scars and gashes, his tail has been cut, and most notably, 3 of his 5 heads have been severed, 2 of which are still clenched upon Bayle's body to this day.
Wow.
The Dragon Priestess notes that after inflicting and suffering these grievous wounds, Bayle made a hasty retreat. But the damage was done, clearly, and I reckon we could even speculate that perhaps Bayle's assault even played a part in why Placidusax's god fled, or perhaps a part in why Placidusax decided to hide away, safe in this place beyond time. This part of the timeline is still unclear to me, but I think Bayle's tyranny did do damage, whenever it was that it occurred. And after this, it inspired Placidusax to hatch a plan. For as he did with Bayle, he saw in man a fierce spirit and insatiable hunger, the very things that he thought might one day fell Bayle the Dread and his drakes.
Wow.
Who would become sacrifices, all.
Dragon Communion. Still gross! Still gross!
In a time long past, Bayle turned upon the Dragon Lord. The foul traitor assailed our master and inflicted a grievous wound, only to make a hasty retreat, becoming a sworn enemy of the brood. Since that day, Bayle and his bloodline, the Drakes, have served as sacrifices for
That's
Dragon
one way to
King.
get rid of them.
This is Florisax, the Dragon Priestess, and here at the Grand Altar she explains the origins of Dragon Communion, that there is a mad hunger and fierceness of spirit that only flows from those young and short of sight, and that after being wounded, Placidusax saw in mankind these qualities that could one day bring about Bayle's doom. This hunger, unfathomable to the ancient dragons, would be weaponized. And so the ancients tempted the Drake warriors with the hearts of the Drakes, who were their Lowborn Kin turned foe. To me, this is one of the most satisfying lore points of the DLC. Previously, we only knew that Drake warriors were driven to consume dragon hearts and pursue the strength of dragons for the sake of the sublime beauty and awe that the dragons inspired. And that was reason enough, but it's such a great unexpected twist that dragon communion was found
unless you can be a
to
dragon.
tempt Drake warriors to consume the heart of Bayle in what the dragon priestess calls the purest form of communion. The fullest sating of hunger and consummation as a dragon whole. And speaking of dragon communion origins, from the Rock Heart, we learn that the first partakers of dragon communion were humans who actually consumed the rock hearts of ancient dragons, not the fleshy hearts of drakes. These rock hearts of the ancients were consumed in the ancient original form of dragon communion, turning the humans into a new form for the first time. So one thing I've been wondering is why the original form of dragon communion required this consumption of ancient dragon hearts specifically. Were these test subjects of sorts, or perhaps a showcase of what Drake Knights could aspire to? As far as I can tell, there are 3 stone hearts in game. One belongs to the ancient dragon man in the dragon pit. One, I assume, would belong to whoever left it behind upon the jagged peak, and the last belongs to the dragon priestess. According to her heart, the priestess was once an ancient dragon herself, but sacrificed that form for feeble flesh to aid in the destruction of Bayle the Dread. She assumed human form to share dragon communion with the world, and to this end she attends the Grand Altar, bestowing the favor of the Dragon Lord upon the Drake warriors who passed through here in that pursuit of Bayle. The fact that Florisax attends a site of dragon communion makes me wonder if the 2 ancient dragons with rock hearts might have sacrificed their original forms in a similar way, giving up their hearts to take over the bodies of the first partakers of dragon communion. And this is just speculation, but there is a dead ancient dragon at each of the 2 sites of dragon communion in the lands between.
Well, that's true.
What if these were the 2 ancient dragons who gave up their rock hearts? That's a fun theory, I think. The idea that these rock hearts were given up willingly is supported by the fact that we know the first partakers of dragon communion were loyal to the ancient dragons and dedicated to their cause. For evidence of this, let's analyze the ancient dragon man, starting with the dragon hunter's katana that he drops. This katana is bristling with a spine of gravelstone and has what is called a jagged gravelstone aura, which is akin to the aura that the dragon communion basins give off. Fittingly too, for this agent of the ancient dragons, his weapon, like all gravelstone weapons, has an anti-dragon effect. But his role wasn't solely to hunt the drakes. His katana reads, formerly a dragon communion warrior, the ancient dragon man was once arbiter of those worthy to devour Bayle. That is, before you killed him and took his weapon for
keep hitting
your own hunt. And incidentally, the ancient dragon man's death might be what allows Egon to progress in his quest.
I am sorry. I repent. Oh, come no closer. Oh, the horror. Please, savage me no further.
I remember that. That's his thing's so sad.
So this pleading from Egon could be directed at Bayle, who does haunt him and who is a dragon one should dread, but his begging for mercy could also be directed at the ancient dragon man, whose red phantom is just down the way, acting, as we mentioned, as a judge of those worthy to devour Bayle, the dreaded one.
Oh,
But
wow.
Egon, wounded as he is from a previous encounter with Bayle, he's in no state to challenge the ancient dragon man, let alone Bayle himself.
Right.
Fittingly, it's been showcased by Zlovsky II that the ancient dragon man's human visage is draconian in origin, and as per the character creation screen, draconians have the stony face of the people of the ancient dragons. As mentioned in our previous video on dragons, there is evidence of humans being within the ancient dragon's culture upon Faram Azula, so perhaps the man who consumed this dragon heart was once loyal to their order.
Right.
Alternatively, if you're in the camp of those who believe that this face was never meant to be seen, you could opt to believe that the ancient dragon man was once from the land of reeds, given he wields a great katana. Dragon communion warriors are commonly from the land of reeds, it seems. You can look to Yura and Eleonora, or even the great katana looted near the Ghost Flame Dragon in the Graveside Plains as more proof of that. But whoever the ancient dragon man was, now he occupies the dragon pit, which from the environment you can figure out is actually a bastion of those in service to the ancient dragons in the realm of shadow.
Yeah.
And I say this because the lead up to the dragon pit features a ton of ancient dragon statues, though they've all fallen into disrepair. Additionally, in the dragon pit itself, you'll find fire-breathing beastmen who we know were servants of the ancient dragons, and the basins here are filled with what I can only assume is the blood of drakes. This is a place that serves the process of dragon communion, and there's even a magma worm here that resides.
Wow.
As you would have learned from our last video on the dragons, the magma worms were once dragon communion warriors.
Yeah.
According to the magma breath incantation, those who have dined on the hearts of drakes will find their humanity slowly slipping away, and once they fully succumb to their fate, they are left no more than worms that crawl the earth. So when a drake warrior eats a drake heart, they inevitably, it seems, turn into magma worms. And I think we can finally understand why by talking about what happens to us when we consume Bayle's heart at the Grand Altar and harness his power. His incantations both read, "Even after being consumed, the throbbing heart of Bayle continues to resist its subjugation, never weakening. One day the fire within will consume the very body and soul of its communion devourer. One day." So could this never-weakening resistance not also be true for the hearts of dragons that drake warriors consume? As mentioned by the magma breath incantation, it is the fate of those who partake in dragon communion to succumb and become a magma worm, which I think finally makes sense because Bayle is a magma dragon, and the drakes are his kin, who have inherited his heat. Even before the DLC, the Magma Worm's scale sword was hinting to us that dragon communion is a grave transgression, for which the Magma Worms were cursed to crawl the earth upon their bellies as shadows of their former selves. And finally, with the DLC, dragon communion being called a curse makes sense. Once consumed, I think these drake hearts, still beating, are resisting their subjugation, just as Bayle's heart describes, and they eventually overwhelm their devourer, turning their vessel not into a glorious dragon, but into an accursed land-bound worm instead. So the sacrifice rituals that the Drake warriors were performing in awe of the dragons were having dubious results, and yet the warriors continued to indulge their appetites, all according to the Dragon Lord's plan. Such a grave transgression also retroactively helps to explain Exekis, who was the Dragon Communion Revenger who was so furious at the Drake warriors that he did not forget his hatred even as he succumbed to the Scarlet Rot. But how many Drake warriors have there really been over the ages? Well, to understand that, let's read the description of the Dragon's Calibloom, which you'll find on your ascent of the Jagged Peak. This flower is dotted with gravelstone and has an uncanny shape, coursing with hot blood. Its description reveals that a single flower is said to blossom only once from the hearts of dead warriors who oft partook of dragon communion. So every time you loot this, you're actually plucking it from the bodies of dead dragon communion warriors.
That is
which
disgusting.
Is a fact that
Oh my
really helps
God.
to tell a story. This Drake warrior likely died to this dragon. 6 Drake warriors died on their way up the peak, and this one got hit by the most telegraphed boulder of all time. What's more, Calibloom might also actually help to explain what arteria leaves are, which are also found on human bodies and are also coursing with blood. So I bet these grow from the hearts of dead warriors as well. But let me take my speculation on Calibloom one step further. So Calibloom's wide red leaves are essentially identical to the leaves on these plants, right?
Yes.
So I think that might mean that these plants might be Calibloom as well. They just don't have the flower anymore, because the flower is said to blossom only once. And these plants blanket the earth in really appropriate places for the story. Here at the Grand Altar of Dragon Communion, for example, and here at the Jagged Peak Summit, which is Bayle's domain, where all the Dragon Communion warriors are coming to challenge him. So the fact that his arena might be carpeted in Calibloom, and the fact that this arena does feature a ton of skeletons is meant to convey, I think, that Bayle has seen many challenges, and that all have failed to take him down.
Wow,
but what
that
about
is
the plants
sick.
at the Grand Altar? Did a great battle take place here as well, between Drake and Drake Warrior? Well, I think there's evidence that it did. As if the gargantuan dead Drake, with what looks like its heart missing from its chest, wasn't enough. Walk upon its wing and you'll be able to loot Dragon Communion harpoons, which I can only assume you're pulling out of its flesh. These were tools of the old Dragon Communion warriors. The keyword there being
This just gets
old,
grosser
which,
and grosser
in
and
addition to
grosser,
the
guys.
harpoons sporting sharp
Why?
gravelstone, might suggest
I don't know,
these
Hubby,
warriors
why?
had the ancient dragon's favor back when the ancients were taking a direct hand in wiping out the drakes. As for what actually killed the gargantuan drake, if you go behind it, you'll notice an enormous spike jutting out from the nape of its neck. And if you travel over the drake's head, you'll actually be able to get up there and get a closer look down at the thing. So through the center of the object is this straight piece of what looks like metal, around which some sort of stone growth has formed. What's more, the metal has a blue-green tinge to it. So what is this thing? My first impulse was just to call it a huge Dragon
Harpoon.
Communion harpoon. The metal rod down the center might have simply corroded over time, and the smaller harpoons do actually have a bit of a green tint to them as well. And green rust is common to metals like copper and brass, after all. On that note, I've seen some speculation online that the green could indicate that the metal is verdigris, which, according to the verdigris discus, is a corroded metal known for its heft. This is a great theory, and it really helps to tie the harpoons to crafting techniques that would have become unique to the realm of shadow. But to play devil's advocate, none of this really explains the rounded stone growths around the metal, which aren't sharp gravelstone like you'd think they should be on a harpoon. One theory I came across that's really cool is that this stone buildup might be fulgurite, which apparently is a sort of fossilized lightning that can occur from lightning strikes. Therefore, another theory is that this giant stake might actually be the remnant of a lightning strike, or perhaps more accurately, a Dragon Communion harpoon that has been imbued with lightning. I feel like that combines all of the theories together. Full
Yeah.
credit to user EDUTY for dropping this geology knowledge on us. But for this giant drake to have been struck down by lightning, that would suggest that the ancient dragons were around to smite it down. So, is there evidence for the ancient dragons being a part of this battle? Well, maybe. An item called Sharp Gravelstone is found nearby on the corpses of lesser drakes. The description reveals that this Sharp Gravelstone is actually the scale of an ancient dragon that has supped on the blood of lesser dragons.
Oh my god.
Suggesting ancient dragons were here, I think, and that they were feasting upon the drakes. What's more,
They
red
were
fulgur
feasting
bloom is
on-
found on the south coast of the Jagged Peak and
That's gross.
is said to bloom where the red lightning of the ancient dragons strikes the earth.
Cannibalism
This
is cool.
description seems to suggest this flower was, in fact, not set to bloom by the flame lightning that assails the peak, but rather by the red lightning of the ancient dragons. And this is probably a good time to mention that there are ancient dragons upon the Jagged Peak who are not hostile to Bayle. So it might not have even been the hostile ancient dragons that generated the fulgur bloom or supped upon the drakes. It might have been friendly ones. This brings us to ancient dragon Senesax, who,
Friendly
among
ones.
other ancients, is actually on Bayle's side. And it's very interesting to note that these ancient dragons saw some merit in Bayle's challenge to Placidusax. For them to switch sides, you'd think there really must have been some injustice in the Dragon Lord's persecution of their Lowborn Kin. Either that, or perhaps these traitorous ancients simply believed that Bayle was stronger than the Dragon Lord, and maybe they believed that might makes right. It's impossible to know for sure. We learn about these traitorous ancient dragons from the hefty red lightning pot, which does this lightning AoE where it strikes and reads, "The ancient dragons who betrayed their lord to side with a tyrant were known for wielding branching red lightning." At first I thought that the branching red lightning would be this attack, but it can't be. These are actually called lightning stakes, and they're the hallmark of other dragons who definitely are not on Bayle's side. Thus, I think the branching red lightning is instead this sort of chain lightning that is characterized by its ability to branch out and chain between enemies. This is the same lightning that Senesax and the new lightning consumables generate. One fascinating thing that happens after you defeat Senesax is that when you reload the area, the space Senesax occupied will instead be filled with a number of these slimes that are imbued with red lightning.
Weird
The implication
and
being,
gross.
I think, that Senesax's flesh has degraded into this form. Fun fact, in the DLC Early Access, these were accidentally silver tears imbued with red lightning, which they quickly corrected to these fleshier variants instead upon release. And I think it's a significant change because in the game's data, this variant of slime is called Wriggle Carrion, and carrion is explicitly defined as a dead animal's decaying flesh. You might not think that the ancient dragons would have flesh, but they do. They can bleed, they can be poisoned, they can rot, and they can die if they are severely wounded. So too, apparently, can they become undying carrion imbued with red lightning. Now, it is a bit weird that these are the only ancient dragons to turn into this sort of carrion. However,
maybe it's a
maybe
punishment?
it only happens to Senesax and her brood because they wield that branching red lightning that we talked about. Maybe that's how the carrion inherited this red lightning, at least. Anyway, I think From Software implemented this carrion spawn because they wanted to signpost other areas where ancient dragons like Senesax would have once stood upon the Jagged Peak. So now we know that where there's carrion, there was once an ancient dragon. And sure enough, wherever you find this red lightning infused carrion, you'll also commonly find ancient dragon smithing stones nearby, which are the scales of these beasts. Therefore, I think that in these places ancient dragons died.
Wow.
But whether they were allied with Bayle and died to Drake warriors, or whether they were allied with Placidusax and died assaulting the Jagged Peak, I think is up to you to decide.
Curse you, Bayle!
Hey then.
true if ever one there was. A fellow Drake warrior.
In Egon's second encounter, he's somehow made it to the base of the peak, despite his injuries. I suppose that by defeating the ancient dragon man, in a way, you cleared the path for him that he could not conquer himself. Because of you, he can go down and out of the chasm that requires a dragon communion warrior to be brave and show no fear.
Egon. Piteous Egon. Do you not remember?
Wow.
Conjure your past. How once you were. When fear was yet foreign to you.
Wow. Okay.
Drake warrior. Dear friend, grant me this one wish. Take this finger, my finger, scale the jagged peak, face Bayle the Dread, and when you do, summon me. Summon my soul. My limbs are limbs no more. My heart is twice over filled with fear. But a Drake warrior I remain, and my soul yet lies on the mountain.
This
With
story
you
just
bring
makes me
Egon
so
on your
sad,
quest,
guys.
Or rather, he brings you on his. Egon's spellbearing that you loot here can be used to craft Egon's harpoons, which can be fired from his bow, which is imbued with Egon's obsession. The harpoons read, "The broken Drake warrior Egon made these one by one in the midst of his agony so that Bayle the Dread himself would know fear."
Wow.
But I think Bayle has already known fear at the behest of a great enemy who he fled from after suffering his grievous wounds, which included the loss of a leg.
Right.
It's the same as what happened to Egon.
I remember that name well. The broken Drake warrior, driven by bottomless hunger and fiery ambition. Precisely what the Dragon Lord envisaged for men who partake in dragon communion. The mad hunger and fierceness of spirit that only flows from those young and short of sight. He rather reminds me of Bayle. In fact, such
Right.
thoughts are unfathomable to ones as old as we.
So it's clear that Egon was designed as a parallel to Bayle, someone who is wounded,
My arms, my legs.
furious,
Bayle! Vile Bayle!
terrified, but unbowed, defined by an unrelenting will.
There is life in me yet! I will soon feast upon your heart!
That will is present in
That
Bayle's
is
descendants as well. We
crazy.
can look to the Ghost Flame Dragon in the Realm of Shadow for proof of this. Ghost Flame Breath reads, "The land of spirit graves is home to all manner of dead, and even the corpses of fallen dragons found their way there. Several of them were endowed with such vivacity that, even in death, they could not fully die." Speaking of the Realm of Shadow, I wonder, has Marika's veil over this land had any effect upon Bayle? When Bayle challenged the Dragon Lord, it would have been back when the Realm of Shadow was still a part of the Lands Between. And only then, long after Bayle retreated to the Jagged Peak, would the Realm of Shadow have been split off from the rest of the world, becoming a land where death flows to, but not from. But perhaps this doesn't matter at all to Bayle, because things between Bayle and Placidusax are at a standstill. The Elder Phantom asks, "O Bayle, do your wounds yet ache?" and has been waiting endlessly for Bayle's fury to crest its zenith, but clearly Bayle has done little in this time. The only evidence we have of Bayle striking against Placidusax at all, if you can call it that, is the presence of the drakes flying all around Farum Azula. Given this new context of a mutual hatred between the drakes and the ancient dragons, I wonder, are these drakes flying around in some sort of suppression of Farum Azula? Or is their presence this environmental set piece that we were never supposed to look too far into? I'd love to know if anyone has any good speculation.
I think it's containment.
Perhaps there's little
What do you
beast
guys
drakes
think?
all
I
Bayle
think
can
given
do
what it
to
is, it's
reach
containment.
the Dragon Lord. Because Placidusax, as mentioned in our last video, has long dwelled in his seat at Farum Azula, in his place beyond time, waiting for his god to return. So maybe he can't even be reached there, physically at least.
My dear Lord Placidusax, tonight, like every night, my solace is yours. May it grant you sleep in your place beyond time.
Somehow, the Dragon Priestess devotes her sleep to Placidusax, an act that likely makes his eternity of waiting easier to bear, and yet he would abandon her in a mere instant should she drink Tiolier's concoction and falter in her duty.
I have broken my pledge. I succumbed to the deep slumber that was meant for my lord. It was a craven act of a foul and lowly beast. Forgive me, good warrior. My lord will no longer look upon me. I have fallen from grace. An old dragon, no longer. Go on.
Aww.
Leave me be.
Here, Florisax laments that she has fallen from grace, which I feel like might be wording that intentionally draws a parallel with losing the grace of the Golden Order.
Yeah.
The dragons did once have the Elden Ring after all, so it makes sense that the ancient dragons could have once had grace. But now Florisax has lost Placidusax's grace, and she lost it just like that. I think this serves to prove just how painfully prideful the ancient dragons are.
Maybe.
I may be fallen, but I need not surrender my honor. On second thought, I believe you do owe me something for the transgression. On a mere whim, you've stripped me of my one and only lord.
Wow.
As such, I require another. You. One day, may you become a dragon whole, a lord of your own making. Lead me, and I will follow, my good lord.
In following this questline, you'll earn Florisax's affection. The love of the ancient dragons has been documented previously with Vike, and it's evident here too with the Dragon Bolt of Florisax you receive. It reads, "There was a time when the priestess never knew love, and thus never used this incantation herself." It's interesting to note that under Placidusax's reign, she did not experience love. But now, according to her spirit ashes, she not only has a human form, but now she has acquired a human heart as well. All thanks to her bond with you.
That's
of course,
crazy.
this love is conditional on whether you can slay Bayle or not. Before we show off Egon's fight with Bayle, I want to take a moment to shout out Displate, who are the sponsor of this video. If you're looking for a dragon-themed print, we actually do have one on there. It's called Guardian of
super
Moonlight, and I reckon you'll have a fun time looking for all the references hidden within. But when you go to buy a print, keep an eye out now for the new Textra option, which is available on select prints in large size as well for the first time. Selecting this option gives a textured finish to your print, adding a depth that can really catch the light beautifully at certain angles. And with the link below, for a limited time, you can get 27% off if you buy 1 or 2 prints, and up to 33% off if you buy more than 3. So let me know in the comments if you pick anything up. But back to the video. On your way up the jagged peak, you might have noticed the dried molten rock at the base. It's a reminder that the jagged peak was a volcano once, though it seems dormant for now. In the surrounds are countless dead drakes, many with that sharp gravel stone upon them that seems to indicate that they were victims of ancient dragons. But even though the description says that they've been supped on, a part of me also thinks they might have just been victim to each other. These dead drakes are surrounded by a jagged peak drake here, and further up, 2 jagged peak drakes clash with each other. Such a thing reminds me of the description of the horn-strewn excrement, which reads, "It is said that the deadliest of the horned predators enjoy the sport of hunting and devouring other horned creatures." Their clash, I think, is this return to the wildness often seen in the days of the Crucible.
Again with the cannibalism.
In times long past,
but I
life
guess
was,
animals will
after
be
all,
animals.
a
Can't really...
crucible of competition. And one revelation from the newfound Bear Communion incantation is that
like,
only through desperate battle with the feral wild can one discover
decide you're gonna
unique to oneself.
Have an exotic pet and then get upset
video,
because, you know,
I feel like
tiger
there is a connection
is a
being
tiger
made here to the Crucible, to the wildness that is so typical of it. A wildness that persists in the drakes despite the order once granted upon their kin. At any rate, the biggest threat to Bayle still isn't from his drakes, it's from you.
And I got
Once, Egon was nothing more than a poor scavenger of battlefields, but then he found honor through dragon communion.
Curse you, Bayle! I hereby vow you will rue this day. Behold, a true Drake warrior, and I, Egon. Your fears made flesh.
From Egon's dialogue, we can note an interesting reveal, that the phantoms of others are embodiments of the soul. It's almost as if Egon's finger is furled in invitation to fight alongside him and fulfill the dream that he wasn't able to achieve in life. In Phase 2, Bayle's fury finally crests its zenith, and he spontaneously generates wings of pure flame lightning, evoking the second set of wings that ancient dragons have, the second set of wings that he was born without. Now the battle nears its end. Thank you for watching.
Solid of scale you might be, foul dragon, but I will riddle with holes your rotten hide. With a hail of harpoons! With every last drop of my being!
Wow! Okay, Egon's badass.
You shall haunt me no longer.
Wow.
Before I go, special thanks as always to MissBap1 for just knocking it out of the park with the cinematography
Seriously.
in this video. Particularly the Bayle and Egon sequences, which were amazing.
Those were amazing.
Also,
this whole video was amazing. I know I was quiet for most of it.
Much 118X. So special thanks to them as well for letting us use
because
some of their cinematography.
There was just so much information to take in. I was just learning
as well.
So much.
Look forward to that. And thank you again for watching.
Another prepare to cry. Vaati, why do you do this to me? Oh. Okay, guys. Wow, what did you think of that? Did you learn anything new? I need a Curse You Bayle t-shirt, I think. Alright, guys. Please remember to comment below. Let me know. What did you think? What should I watch next? As always, please hit that like button. It really helps us out. If you're not already a fellow fan geek, please subscribe to our channel. It is definitely appreciated. And hit that notification bell with your notifications turned on so that you know every time we drop a new video. And I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.